Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask a Seminarian. So I'm really excited to talk about today's question. It's something that I've thought about and really enjoyed discussing. And in fact, theologians and philosophers have debated about this for centuries, if not millennia. And the question is, can you prove that God exists? Now, this is a different question than does God exist? Now, obviously, if I can prove that God exists, well, then obviously God exists. But even if I can't prove that he exists, that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. God certainly could exist still, even if I'm unable to prove it. It's kind of the difference between knowing something versus showing something. So, for example, I know in my heart that God exists without, by faith, by understanding, by reasoning, by hope. I know that God exists. And that's important for my relationship with God. But then that's something different to show that God exists, or to prove that God exists. So I can know that he exists, but then is there a second step? Can I prove that God exists? And that's what we're talking about today. Now, there are some philosophers or theologians who would land on the side of saying, well, yes, you can prove that God exists through logical argumentation and reasoning, and through revelation, you can prove that God exists. On the other hand, there's a number of philosophers and theologians who would say, well, no, you can't prove that God exists. He's not like a mathematical formula where you can prove 2 + 2 = 4, or the sum of angles of a triangle is 180 degrees. Or you can't use scientific experimentation to prove a hypothesis or disprove a hypothesis. And that's because God is entirely other. He's outside of time and space in this material universe. And scientific methods, which are designed to measure things within the universe, obviously wouldn't apply. And so you can't use scientific methods to prove that God exists, who is outside of our scientific universe and realm. Now, there are still really good philosophical arguments and discussions for talking about God's existence, though. So even if you can't necessarily prove it, there are some really good argumentation to show how it's more than reasonable to believe that God exists, or at least show, yes, this isn't just some crazy belief that's not based on any reason. I think, like we talked about in a previous podcast, it's something that that reasons back up, and then it's that faith that takes you the next step of the way. So that leap of faith that gets you to that belief in God. Now, one of the philosophers who falls on the side of that you cannot prove God's existence is Blaise Pascal. Now, I really like Pascal, and I would probably fall under this camp as well, that you can't definitively prove God's existence. But he would say, and Pascal would say, that's because our reason and our logic is limited. It's fallible. And so you can't definitively prove God's existence because of that. Now, at the same time, he would argue that God set it up that way on purpose. God purposefully makes it so that he's not a talking mouth in the sky where you can look up and be like, oh, yep, there's God again looking down. And that's because God isn't interested in coercing us into a belief, or he's interested in wooing us and bringing us into relationship with him and having us live in faith and hope and love with him. And and so part of that is, again, God not coercing us to believe. And in fact, Blaise Pascal says that God has provided evidence of his existence sufficient enough for those with an open heart, but not so much as to compel those whose hearts are closed. That's because our freedom is incredibly important. If we weren't free and God would just compel our beliefs, well, then we would be puppets and machines, and you can't love if you're a machine. And so God, again, he woos us. He's like a breeze blowing through the trees and the leaves, where you can't see it, but if you're paying attention, you can feel it. And in that way, evidence for God's existence is all around us. You just have to have an open heart and be willing to look and to experience it. And so, just because even if you couldn't necessarily prove that God exists, that doesn't mean that the discussions or the arguments for God's existence are silly. On the contrary, they can be incredibly useful and effective for a number of reasons. One is I find them very fulfilling and strengthening and renewing my faith. So even if you're going through a difficult time, or your relationship with God or your prayer life is feeling dry, having a set of arguments or beliefs that provide really strong and compelling evidence for God's existence builds up your faith and helps you keep going even when you're being attacked, maybe spiritually or by people who don't believe in God. So that can be really powerful. Also, evangelistically, they can be very, very useful to have arguments for the belief for believing in God. Oftentimes people say, how can you believe in God? That's really silly. Or, they might have some counter arguments for it. But if you're able to back that up with strong evidence and argumentation for why it's more than reasonable to believe in God, it can very easily open up the door for someone to perhaps start seeking God further. And as Christ said, seek and you will find, knock and the door shall be opened. And if philosophical argumentation for God's existence brings someone to start seeking God more, well, they're on the path to finding God, or more for God finding them. So I think it's really interesting and neat to talk about these different arguments for God's existence. And that's actually so what I wanted to do and kind of introduce of what's called apologetics. So apologetics comes from a Greek word, apologia, which means defense. And so apologetics is really providing a defense for your beliefs or a defense for the Christian faith. And this also kind of comes from 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, where it says, always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is within you, but do it with gentleness and respect. So you should always have a defense or a reason for the faith, for the hope that lies within you. But again, do it with gentleness and respect. When you're talking about Christianity, the goal is not to turn people away because we're being so crazy and arguing, and getting hot-headed about it. But calmly talking about why, giving a reason for why we believe in God is very important. And two theologians that I really, really like reading and are brilliant when it comes to apologetics and giving arguments for God's existence and a defense of the Christian faith are William Lane Craig and Peter Kreeft. So I recommend, if you have not heard of them before, if you Google them, they're pretty well known in the apologetics and Christian world and have some really fantastic arguments and talking about the Christian faith. And so one of the other things I want to do as part of this episode of the podcast is just give you a quick example of what one of these arguments for the existence of God, so kind of trying to prove or at least show that it's more than reasonable to believe that God exists. And this is argument championed by William Lane Craig. He's done a lot and written about this, and it's called the Kalam Cosmological argument. And essentially, it's a very simple argument with two premises and a conclusion. So the first premise is that everything that begins to exist has a cause. So this seems pretty intuitive, right? If something begins, then something caused that thing to begin. Things just don't pop into existence without any rhyme, reason, or cause. Even a magician who pulls a bunny out of a hat, well, there was a hat, there was a hand that pulled it out. There was some cause there's causes that lead other things to occur. So this seems, incredibly self-explanatory or just makes sense when you think about life in general. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. The second premise is that the universe began to exist. And so based on latest scientific theories and understandings of astrophysics, it's widely held belief that the universe began from the Big Bang, maybe 9 to 13 or so billion years ago. So this is widely held as true in the scientific community, that the universe existed through the events of the Big Bang 9 to 13 billion years ago. So showing that the universe began to exist. Now, if we look at our first premise, everything that began to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. But what is the universe? Well, the universe is all of time and space and matter. Pretty much everything that we could ever possibly know, see, feel, taste, touch, everything. Time, space, and matter is the universe. So something caused that to begin. But whatever caused that to begin must be outside of time and space and matter. And that thing must have been incredibly powerful to caused the universe. Again, so there's something outside of the universe, outside of time and space, incredibly powerful that caused it to begin. Now, what is that thing? Well, we would probably call that God, right? And also, one of the additional pieces about this argument is that whatever this being is, God, has to have made the decision or agency to choose to create the universe. Because if it was just a set of arbitrary conditions that would cause the universe that were present outside of time forever, that meant, well, the universe should have existed forever. However, at a specific point when time began 13 billion years ago is when that being outside of time and space created the universe. So showing that it was not a pre-existing condition that was around forever, but this being caused the universe to begin 13 billion years ago. Now, why can't that being, what caused that being? Well, that being didn't have a beginning. So the premise was everything that begins to exist have a cause. Well, God doesn't have a beginning, therefore God has no cause. So anyway, it's a really interesting argument to think about. In fact, I encourage you, if you Google Kalam cosmological argument, William Lane Craig has a video that kind of walks through it. It's pretty neat and flashy and breaks it down in pretty quickly. So I recommend to check it out. And again, the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't prove the Christian God exists, but it proves that it's more than reasonable to think that something exists outside of this universe, some being that created it. And there are additional apologetics or additional arguments for Christianity and our beliefs that show, all right, so why believe in the Christian God, or what attributes about this God who created the universe can we know? And so as we discuss and go on further, we can look at logical arguments that shows that it's the Christian God that we believe in and believing in Christ and all that. So really, really interesting to kind of get your philosophical juices flowing and think about these things. But anyway, I'm hoping to have some additional episodes in the future talking about some other arguments that people have used historically to prove that God exists, or at least look at why it's more than reasonable to believe that he exists. All right, well, I hope you found this interesting and engaging, and thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, thank you so much from all of us here at SUMC and the Ask a Seminarian podcast. God bless.